Ahojte druháci, pozdravujem všetky tri triedy, Bčku, Dčku aj Cčku. Nejdem dnes vám hovoriť o žiadnom poradí, pretože tento týždeň máme trošku špeciálny. Vzhľadom na to, že minulý týždeň kvôli aj sneženiu, aj tomu, že ideme paralelne na internete tu u nás doma, tak to Wi-Fi nám nestíhalo, nám tie hodiny padali. A ja som sa rozhodol vám hodiny nahrávať dopredu. Neviem, či sme už niekedy takto hodinu mali, že v podstate každá trieda dostane teda oznám status a ja vám pod neho zavesím iba jeden link na hodinu a táto hodina je nahratá na YouTube, to by sa mi malo podariť a ak sa bude dať, tak ja skúsim tieto hodiny nahrať aj do skupiny, aby ste to mali aj na Facebooku a možno vám tu bude žrať trošku menej bajtov. Celú hodinu nahrávam dopredu cez tento program Bandicam, no a ja mám sobotu, ja mám ešte sobotu, vidíte, pracovnú, a takže v podstate vám tieto hodiny nahrám dopredu a budem vám ich posielať podľa toho, ako ich budeme mať. Druhý dôvod je ten, že vám budem suplovať hodinu umenia a kultúry za pani profesorku Kratochvíľovú. No a sme sa aj dohadovali, že ako ďalej ísť, že či treba preberať, lebo niektoré triedy ste s prezentáciami z UMK popredu, niektoré ešte máte niečo odprezentovať. No ja som presvedčil, že túto tému, čo idem mať s vami dnes a možno aj ďalšiu hodinu, vidím, ako mi to časovo vydá, že je dosť taká, že na UMK je dosť o umení a môže vám dosť veľa dať, tak ona súhlasila, že v podstate si môžem teda odučiť dejepis. Čiže v podstate UMK vaše bude dejepisné, to sa deje bežne, že ak máme suplovanie v škole, takže máte vlastne iný predmet. No, takže buď jednu alebo aj 2 hodiny, ak budem dnes zvládať, vám nahrám a vám teda ich posúvam ďalej. Dobre, čo platí pre vás? V podstate zmena je v tom, že nemáte hodinu rozdelenú na polovice, ako sme mali pri Facebooku, ale máme teda iba jednu, čiže pod vašim fórom, ktoré ste tu niekde mali, tak ja som vám zavesil teda už link, kde pozeráte toto video a zavesil som vám aj otázku. Netuším teraz v sobotu, v minulosti neviem ešte, čo sa vás spýtam, ale všetky tie triedy teda mi odpovedajte, ešte kým teraz kvákam, ak sa dá, aby si potom nemuseli to YouTube nejako prepínať. Samozrejme, ak na to zabudnete alebo si to necháte na neskôr, tak nezabudnite prosím vás a komentujte, pretože podľa toho nahádzujem absencie. Ak máte nejaké otázky, kľudne sa pýtajte, pretože ja na tej hodine teraz som, s vami diskutujem, tu s vami vám odpisujem, takže môžete sa aj iné veci pýtať. Ak by bolo niečo nejasné, napríklad zo zadaní, ktoré teda už máte robiť, tak sa môžete spýtať. Kto stále nevie, o čom hovorím, tak máte ich v zložkách Files Ancient Civilizations, kde máte aj tabuľku tých starovekých civilizácií Grécku, ktoré robíme teraz. A už vidíte sami, že tam toho dosť veľa, dosť veľké aktivity, že potrebujete na to veľmi veľa času, takže treba si to naozaj rozlíšiť. Ja si zoberiem môj diár, lebo som sa aj poznačil, že čo ešte vám mám pripomenúť. No v podstate ten termín si dajte pozrieť teda 28. februára, čiže zase tento február pre vás bude taký náročný možno s tým dejepisom, že ako ste mali teraz mesiac oddych od poslania, aj tých mesiac alebo 2-3 týždne, mesiac a pol dokonca ste mali oddych od dejepisu, tak môžete pracovať. No, nezabudnite teda reagovať na komentáre, to je z mojej strany v podstate všetko. Ja si budem už len sledovať čas, mám tu aj stopky a dokonca mám tu hlavne na Bandicam mi beží čas. Dobre, takže dúfam, že všetko je jasné, ak by nie, tak ľudia sa pýtate v komentároch. Som na hodine, takže všetko je OK. Dobre, OK guys, I moved back and actually I was uploading some more pictures. So the previous lesson we started with this revision. When we had this revision with the periodization, we moved already this Mycenaean and Cretan civilization in Mycene and in Crete, about Dark Period and Antiquity. We started talking about Archaic Period. The only thing I added was this picture of polis, not to forget this word, metropolis and Istropolis and many others. It was not only the town, the city itself, but also surrounding with lands and settlements and farms and villages. But around there were mountains, as you can see. Then I was talking a lot about democracy. I added only pictures of Solon and of Pericles, and how these attempts to create this democracy that he very nicely responded, if it was positive or negative. And keep in mind that at that time it was not for women, for foreigners, It was much more harsh, but they were actually struggling and evolving, improving, so it was getting better. But without a serious control, without understanding economy, for example, needs of people, very often this democracy was turned to tyranny. So from Pericles, great democratic politician, to tyrannies like Pisistratos, that actually people loved him and they preferred this authoritarian regime. Okay, we passed this not very complicated system. When I show it, it's actually very simple, this chart, so compared to us. Then I started to talk because I realized I have more time. I realized that we have time to speak about Olympic Games, and I finished somewhere in here. So if you remember, that was this place Olympia was famous for having the temple of goddess Hera, and for her celebrations for 2 weeks every 4 years, representatives, ambassadors from all Greek city-states, from all Hellada, from all Hellas, all Greece came, and once in 4 years they lived in peacefully. Instead of fighting each other, they were only competing. So it was kind of ritual war, like who is better, who is best in some discipline, and so on. Mostly they were athletics. In a moment you will see various disciplines, various sports that were there. Because they're actually training, physical training for war, for military. So if you're better in javelin throwing, in wrestling, or in just running, so probably you would win also in the battlefield because you can hit them. You can be better in this style. Uh, what else? Later on, they realized that it's also good to train not only your body, because not only the strongest win, but if you want to win the war, you must be clever, and that's a basic idea how to be. So for them, they realized with their numbers, they need to be very strong, but also very wise, very clever. So for that reason, they started to compete in reciting, in poetry. So actually, people stood up, like you have the slow Kubin or whatever competition, and you just like recite a poem, okay? And who was the better one? Probably he would be also a good speaker, who good at rhetorics, as the Romans call it. It is art of speech. So how you talk, if your charisma is good enough, and you can persuade people to follow you, and if you're wise enough, if you read books, let's say The Art of War of Sun Tzu, Chinese emperor, you have a lot of information how to win, defeat enemy that is much stronger, much bigger army with higher numbers, ranks, and so on. So that's why this was a very nice symbolic combination, that competing is not only about who is better and just like to feel like superior, but it's also to represent that wisdom and peace are also important. So this is basic idea of Olympic Games, that once in a short, long period we meet various nations and countries, and we do sports and we play games to celebrate peace and harmony between people. And for that reason, in Greece, for 2 weeks during these Olympic Games, there was sacred peace that nobody could ever break. If they did, if they were just secluded and they had like bad luck and so on. But people liked this idea so much that they kept it for them. It was so important. They started to count their calendar from 776 before Christ. All this symbolism of putting together the soul and body in Greek ideals is called kalokagatia. Kalokagatia, you may know also the competition for physical education, but it should be also about kind of development of all the things you have, the sciences, your wisdom, because as Greeks started to understand and appreciate was the beauty, they didn't see that somebody's beauty because it's like a lot of makeup, or I don't know, big boobs and so on, but he's good and beautiful at the same time, that he's idol for, like, let's say, to win Olympic Games. What does it mean? It had to be harmony of body and soul. I can tell you one example. Our ice hockey teams in 1990s, they were actually losing in these A categories, but once they got a couple of good players like Richo Lindner and Michal Hanzush, who were actually very clever. They had also universities, and they understood that there should be atmosphere, there should be like good motivation, and also with good tactics that they studied. They can win, they can prevail, and in this way, in Greece, they understood that if you train your body, if you're fit, That's great, but not enough. You must be wise. Club, you have to study too. On the other hand, if you concentrate only on education, you don't just take care of your body. You can just, you're fat, or you can just, I don't know, die of cancer or whatever, you know. So this is combination of body and soul. You have to evolve and train and practice both of these sides. And together, this harmony of body and soul, this beauty and goodness is created by your physical state and your wisdom. For me, I love football, but just I don't play it anymore. I don't play it anymore, but at least I go hiking. So for me, this physical activity is really excellent and like freeing the soul, and then I can concentrate on teaching and studying and so on. Olympia, as it is like today, but in the past it looked more like, yeah, the winners were giving this alive wreath as a symbol of victory, and sometimes some piece of gold or silver. That's why silver, gold, and bronze medals started to be used. And goddess with these wings, I'm not sure if when I play this keylock tab, if my face is gone. Probably not, but I can see it, so you can see I can see wings in here. And this is Nike, this is goddess of victory that was usually standing on the hand of goddess Pallas Athena, goddess of wisdom. Okay, these are ancient Olympic games with, for example, throwing the disc, so-called discobolos, very famous statue later on, long jump, throwing javelin, oštepom, equestrian events. Equestrian means horse riding, and of course for battlefield it was important to have this double-wheeled chariot. So they were just competing who is better and competing in this. Running events, but as you can see, in one race the athletes wore armor and carried the shield. So that was also with all this stuff. And when you throw, you have these disciplines in gymnastics and athletics, throwing heavy stuff. It was a combination of these. Boxing, okay, wrestling, because this is like art of war. Pankration. Let's read about it. It's a combination of wrestling and boxing. The only rules were that the athlete could not bite his opponent or gouge at his eyes or nose. Yeah, so this is similar to this pentagon, hexagon stuff. Okay, the 19th century picture how some Olympic winning this equestrian chariot race is being rewarded with olive red. Usually, some rich city-states started to make all the statues of these Olympic winners to celebrate them, because these guys were really like famous and superstars, just like sportsmen today. And this is Olympia as it looked in a classical archaic period, with the goddess of Hera temple in the middle, and various buildings and theater, that is for poetry. And for example, this was hippodrome. Hippodrome is a venue for this hippo. In Greece it means horse, for horse riding, equestrian competitions. Okay, so let's move on. In this terracotta vases, we have probably original appearance. As you see, the sportsmen usually competed naked, and women were not allowed to participate, not even as a crowd, as the audience. And accompanied during these disciplines, there was a music being played, like this double flute, typical of these. This idea became so great that when Romans, who occupied Greek states in late ancient times, when they turned to Christianity, which was this Olympic Games celebrating these pagan gods, pohanskí bohovia, so Romans actually banished, zakázali, they banished these Olympic Games. Despite Greeks celebrated them, but actually they disappeared. And when in 19th century, Pierre de Coubertin, Swiss physician, understanding the meaning of sports. So he didn't like very much that some countries were competing, playing football, but they were like fighting and killing, so he got an idea, what about restoring these Olympic Games like in ancient times with all these ideals? And actually in 1896, Olympics in Athens were being organized on these venues in Olympia, on the same stadium which still exists even today. And every Olympic game start in here. The Olympic fire is being burned like the fire from a fireplace of goddess Hera, and is spread it to the place of to the venue of Olympic Games. And they started to compete. There were 12 countries, and among them there was one Slovak guy, and a student of our gymnasium, of our school, Alois Sokol, but during the times of Magyarization, he was written with SZ, Sokol, Sokol, but he won a couple of races, but he sees some bronze medals in long and short runners, but he was one of the first Olympic champions. He didn't win actually gold, but he was one of these famous, and he was studying at our school before that. And this idea became so great that even before the First World War, some more states participated. Then, because of world wars, they did this Olympic Games didn't take place. Just like in Tokyo last year, they just didn't happen. They were not organized because of epidemic, but it became like kind of like a prestige for countries and towns to organize it, to welcome sportsmen from all over the world, and more countries started to participate, from 12 to 20, 30, 40, and so on. The really first big Olympic Games were in 1936, in which Germany started to prepare it, but 3 years before that, Nazi seized power. So Adolf Hitler changed these Olympic Games into Nazi propaganda of a great Übermensch, great muscular man, and swastikas all around. So that was actually very symbolical, that 100 meters and 400 meters and hurdles, 110 meters races were won by Afro-American black Jesse Owens, famous athlete, and Adolf Hitler had to shake his hand. He refused, but he was the winner, And this is symbolical that all these races and ethnical problems were overcome by this. Sad was that Jesse Owens came back to America, and he was not so popular among many people, because still there had been a lot of racism in USA until today. Ku Klux Klan is still famous organization thanks to Donald Trump too, and the other things happened that after the Second World War, there were big competition between socialist and capitalistic countries. Let's say in 1980, capitalist countries, USA, refused to attend Olympic Games in Moscow because Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan as a protest. 4 years later, on the other hand, socialist countries didn't participate in Olympic Games in Los Angeles as like give it back. In München, in Germany, in 1972, Palestinian terrorists attacked this sportsman village, and they tried to kidnap and negotiate, blackmail Israeli sports national team. And actually they killed many of them. So many things were happening, but let's say in 1992, there were Olympic Games in Barcelona, which was after the end of the Cold War, and Freddie Mercury was singing their beautiful song Barcelona, that experienced fascist regime of Francisco Franco. So suddenly people were celebrating, and that was so open, so great, and our ice hockey team playing in Winter Olympics in Lillehammer in Norway in 1994, defeating Canada 3-1. That was famous, excellent. But in 1996, for a big surprise, everybody expected that Athens and Greece will be given Olympic Games for the centennial anniversary, but it was not. And not only the other countries like Sydney, Australia, but it was Atlanta, USA. Obviously, the worst town for organizing from all the candidates was given because it is the seat of Coca-Cola company. And obviously these guys, Coca-Cola, just bribed the committee, Olympic committee, who gave it to them. When Greeks were complaining, nothing happened. Only next 4 years, at 2000, Sydney, Australia was given again. So everybody was so angry that it was a big scandal in Olympic committee, Olympic organization. So many things had to be changed. And finally, Athens were giving Olympics in 2004. They built a lot of stadiums, but already Greece was very bad in economy. And then finally they bankrupted. Greece bankrupted. It had led big problems in past decades. And all these events, sports events, most of them are just being like in ruins today, and with grass growing and so on. So really sad story. That's why you have task to pick up some Olympic Games that you find interesting. Don't forget, it's not only about modern ones, but even about old ones, so the ancient times. So read something about them, pick up some interesting and fun facts about them. Okay, the third feature of this archaic period is Greek colonization. Grécka kolonizácia, what was that? Greeks were great sailors, as I told you, and because the country was full of mountains, as they were growing lands and protecting, developing this democracy, attracting more and more people, having this system, they realized probably they don't have enough food for everybody. So very soon, especially young people started to build ships and start to sail and colonize islands in the Aegean Sea. It was not enough, so they start to settle in Asia Minor. Ázia Minor je latinské pomenovanie Malej Ázie, ktorým v geografii nazývame vlastne celý poloostrov Ázie, ktorý vchádza do tohto výbežku vlastne medzi Stredozemným a Čiernym morom. No a dnes je to vlastne celé Turecko, ale pokiaľ Turecko vôbec vznikne, Osmanská ríša alebo Byzancia, tak pardon, prezývajú Anatólia, ale v tomto období už od Rímanov Ázia Minor a v latinčine a skrz latinčinu do angličtiny sa toto pomenovanie dostalo, že znamená to Ázia Malá Minor. Major znamená veľký, minor znamená po latinsky malý. So Asia Minor means Malaysia, Little Asia, and they realized that this long coast is actually with a lot of plains around and they can grow a lot of wheat and a lot of vegetables, and they can bring it back, export it back to their hometowns, home city states. So gradually a lot of people colonized it in such high numbers that more Greeks were living outside of Greece along the coast of Asia Minor, in Cyprus, in Cyrenaica, which is Libya nowadays and actually Egypt, then all coast of Black Sea, even in Ukraine, in Crimea, Kherson, that's Greek name, okay, in Russia you see, Georgia and so on. Then they settled very important settlements. Their colonizations were in southern Italy, and also in the Sicily. You know that there is a big volcano in Sicily, and this from Vesuv to Etna, and thanks to these volcanic ashes, these lands here are really fertile. So the highest production, not only for Greek city-states, but even later for Roman Empire, was in the island of Sicily. And here Greeks colonized in such high numbers that it was a crucial place for Greeks. They could actually develop their democracy and art, but somebody else was making food for them, producing food. And there were Sicilian Greeks living in Syracuse or in Naples that were established by Greeks, or Tarentos. Also they settled in Sardinia, Corsica. They settled in southern Celtic lands of Gallia, nowadays France. They established a city called Massilia, yeah, it's Marseille, and even in Iberian Peninsula, and even they supposed to have it like the end of the world. Actually, they sailed even beyond, because we have proved that they call these Gibraltar Straits the Heracles Pillars, Heraklové stĺpy, but still they knew that at the end of the world there is another sea. So they sailed and they knew that there are Canaries and maybe even Azores Islands in here. And actually in 8th century BC, they mention one expedition of one philosopher that was geographist, some soldiers, only to explore new lands for these colonies. And they said that they sailed like all the lands Mediterranean. It was really dramatic and full of adventures. And suddenly the story ends when they sailed to open Atlantic Ocean. They call it Atlantic because they believe there is this hidden kingdom of Atlantis covered by flood, you know. But suddenly, after many years, some of the crew, posádky, they appeared from Egypt and they came back home from Egypt. So there is hypothesis that this could have been this Greek expedition could be first voyage around Africa before Portuguese navigators in the 15th century. But we don't have proof for that. Keď som už spomínal tieto veci, I still can speak English, sorry. Actually, even before Greeks, Phoenicians were great sailors, and if you remember, also there is this hypothesis that they could have discovered America. So, interesting thing, but what is the point? That those city-states, they were crowded, so they founded their colonies, and they provided them food production. What is even important, so not only this grain and metals and wood, with exporting wine, olive oil and wool and culture, of course. So each new place like Byzantium was like fisherman village, but important for Athens. So they had like their kids states, I would call it a children's state, and they were allied. So what does it mean? When Persian Empire, Perská ríša, that you know that it brought down Mesopotamia, even Egypt, one day would come in the 5th century BC, they attacked these colonies of Greece. And of course, these Greek towns and city-states colonies started to fight. And who would help them? Of course, their mother towns, in Greece. For Persians, then, these rebellions of Greek towns, city-states in Asia Minor, and help from their mother city-states was a pretense, čiže zámienka, for Persians to invade Greece and started with Greek-Persian wars that I'm going to tell you soon. Okay, so this is very important thing because Greeks, as you see, established many places around this Mediterranean, just like later Romans. And this is the beginning of the second period of antique Greece, of antiquity, which we call classical period. And it's typical for a couple of things. First, I will tell you something about Greek-Persian wars because they are really famous. You know them all. But I shall repeat many of the stuff from your elementary school. And the victory of Greeks in these Persian wars brought a lot of power to Athens. When you have a lot of power, a lot of money, then you can waste surplus of money to such useless things as art and culture. And that was really thing that we talk about golden age of Athens, already living in democracy, but with very famous philosophy, with great architecture, theater, sculptures, and actually the ideals that I'm going to tell you about. Not enough because they had Athenians had another guys who were like opposed and didn't like their success very much, and that was city-state of Sparta. And fighting, competing Sparta and Athens with their allies caused terrible civil war among Greeks that brought finally this classical period to the end with brand new kingdom called Macedonia. Not today Northern Macedonia, Slavic country, but Macedonia of Alexander the Great. Another Greeks that would spread this Greek culture to Persia, to Egypt, and to all Asian world. That's why we repeat and even empower this culture, Greek culture, that was adored by many nations and periods and histories around. Takže preto aj dôvod, prečo som pani profesorka hovoril, že dajte mi tú umenia kultúru, pretože toto sa podľa mňa fajn hodí a bude to minimálne opáčko. Okay guys, so let's start with the first topic that we have in here in classical Greece, which is Persian wars. This didn't last so long period because actually Persians surprisingly lost these wars. From a couple of pictures, as you can see, Greeks wearing this typical hoplite armor, as they call heavy infantry of these, how to say, rich farmers. And as in Athens, according to Solon reform, they had to buy themselves armor. People, there were two classes who were above them, people who had to buy a chariot, and eventually the richest guys who had to buy a warship called triera that you've seen here. And this is Greek battleship, typical with this beak that was actually crashing, making holes in the enemy's ships and sinking them down. Dying hoplite in here and emotion. I will explain it because it's a very big difference, of course. Of course, there were also people who were dressed in very much like simpler clothes, who were the poorest, like sling shooters or auxiliary forces, so on. So as I told you, the beginning of Persian wars was that Persian Empire actually spreaded their power all around. Still, for them, it was really big and great empire, but for Greeks living in democratic states, still they saw them as slaves, as people who were enslaved. So thus, when Persians overruled these city-states like Ephesus, Smyrna, Ilium, that's Troy, Chalcedon, or I should close it, Halikarnassos, for example, so Miletos, very famous Ephesus. So of course Greek city-states, Athenians, Spartans, Corinth start to support them. So proud Persians said, yes, so we are going to bring our power and revenge to you. So they crossed whole great armies, crossed this Byzantium, this Bosporus Strait, and invaded Thrace, Macedonia, and city-states in Attica. Of course, this huge army had to be supported all the time by navy that was bringing plenty of food to them. So usually Persian armies couldn't attack Greeks in inlands, but only along the coast. And of course, their target were main city-states like Athens in here. If we were at the lesson, I would definitely give you videos by John Green, and you will hear actually some words in here.
Hi, I'm John Green. This is Crash Course World History, and today we're going to do some legitimate
Okay, and this is the thing that during the lesson we are going to watch it sometimes with subtitles because you had to get used to it. And this young, he was young, one day, he's actually the historian, but you may know him from our introduction and also for these famous teenage novels that you may like. And yeah, he's talking about these Persians and so on. It's really interesting to watch those videos. It's not in the notes, so if you want to watch it at home, so just look for John Green Crash Course History, and he got a couple of channels and series of videos. They're really old and interesting, and it's like 12 minutes, so you can watch it. And actually explaining also that Persians were not so bad, and usually that's kind of propaganda of Greeks later on making heroes of them. Maybe I want to show you, yeah, this animation, this animated cartoon stuff about democracy and so on, and battles. How they fought. Probably this is the Battle of Salamis, Bitka pri Salami. Okay, I'm not going to tell you more about this. So let's go back to presentation. So first campaign was organized by a king called Darius. In English language, they adopted not Greek but Roman version of their name. So his name is not Darius but Darius. And he actually brought a huge army of 80,000 men to Greece, and their main target was city-state of Athens. That Athenians stood against them. But as I told you, Olympic Games are really important because they led all Greeks to study hard, but also to train a lot, to be good fighters, good warriors. And these two armies, about like 40,000 Greeks, including Herodotus, the founder of history, clashed with 80,000 Persians. High moral, high training, excellent armor of Persians brought them, and very good tactics and also very good strategic position brought that actually Persians were defeated. So Athenians surprisingly won this battle because of great leadership of Strategos of Athens, Miltiades, who immediately after the battle sent a messenger, the fastest runner called Pheidippides, to run to Athens, which was about 26 miles, but in kilometers, that's 42 kilometers. And he came to Agora is a square in Athens, and he told to the assembly of elders, "We won," and he died because of exhaustion. And for his memory, at Olympic Games, they started to run marathon long run, which is this 42,126 or 24 meters long run for his victory. That was very big and surprising, but it proved actually that if you have army that got like that are free men fighting for their freedom with good clever guys commanding them, and also they themselves like physically strong, so they can prevail and win, which of course made Persians eager to bring it back. But it happened 10 years later when the son of Darius the first, because we'll have two Dariuses. We have son of Darius the first, Xerxes. This guy was depicted in famous movie 300. You probably all watch it. That is really stylization of muscular guys and dark people, and Persian army is full of ninjas and samurais and rhinos and crazy things. The point is that that is according to comic book by Alan Moore. That is very famous guy. You may know Watchmen, for example. Maybe some other stories. One of the most famous comic writers. And one of his first comic books was this 300 or Sparta. And his comic book was so great for many people that Hollywood decided to shoot it because despite of all these fake and fantastic things happening, the storyline is actually real, according to Herodotus, how he described it later on, and Thucydides, both of them, how they described it. And it's actually true. Of course, they didn't have rhinos, but they did have elephants. They didn't have ninjas, but they had like excellent special forces that were really great in martial arts, in combat. So that's true. That the thing is that Athenians at that time realized that against Xerxes' army that was even bigger than 10 years before that, that was 150,000 men. So together with auxiliary forces, they could have had about 250,000 men, according to the Greek historians. Uh, Athenians then, as a democratic state, when this Persian Xerxes army was marching down to the south of Greece, so they were arguing, fighting in assembly, like whether to surrender, like many Greek city-states, become slaves or not. But they still called to other states like, let's help us, let's fight it. We defeated them in Marathon, we can do it again. But many were scared. The only army that came to help Athenians, surprisingly, were these Spartans. That was actually enemy of Spartans. But even Sparta, I will tell you, because we will talk about them, they had two kings, this duarchy or diarchy, but also some part of democracy. And these two kings, one of them decided to disrespect decision of their assembly that denied to help Athenians. Say, let them be philosophers, pussies, and we can we'll defend ourselves. But one of these two kings, Leonidas, decided to go there like for a trip, and he said like nobody can join me from 10,000 Spartan excellent warriors. So if you want to go with me to Athens for a trip, let's go. So 300 joined him, but on the way as they were marching, they were not 300, but other of their allies joined them. They were not such good quality, but another Greek hoplites and so on. And in this way, they create army of about 1,500 men, still comparable. When they came to Athens, they realized that Athenians are scared and they decided not to fight, but to take all the population to their port, to their harbor, get on the ships, because Athenians were very good navigators, they excellent navy, they believe that in the seas they can defend much better than in the land, and transport all the families, all the kids and women on the island near Athens that is called Salamina. And here they try to defend this island on the sea, in the seas. And they realize they cannot do it because Persian army was marching, and within 1 week they could come and they could destroy them. But within 1 week, within like 3 days, they couldn't do that. So Spartans decided to help Athenians with this evacuation of civilians, and they marched to the north and they pick up narrow. It's not a pass. It's not a mountain pass, but it's actually like downhill coast or a beach. Today there is a highway and sea is like somewhere here. Of course, after like 2,500 years, the land is going down. So now the beach line is like maybe even 1 kilometer away from the place. But imagine that in ancient times, this land, as there is highway, so there was sea already. So these 300 soldiers, Spartans, hoplites, decided to defend and at least slow down Persian armies in here. And what followed? What followed is known from these stories of the Battle of Thermopylae, as it is called. And when Persians came, they realized what is tried to negotiate with them, persuaded to join them. They refused, and they started to fight. And excellent fighting skills and high moral of Spartans slowed down Persian army. That they kept this passage for 3 days, which is unbelievable, but it's very easy because Persian armies couldn't like use all their dominant numbers, and all the time they could send again like 3, 4, 500 men in first line to fight them. And in case Spartans kept their formation with those shields, and I decided to pick up another movie from 1962. Thermopylae, that as you can see again with the same style and lambda letter on their shields and with some auxiliary forces behind them, and they could actually slow down and keep their army. So this is similar between mountains and beach. They were fighting for 3 days. What happened? They could have survived maybe longer, but as Herodotus in his histories said, alongside him, Greeks were betrayed and killed. How to deal with the situation? Xerxes had no idea, but just then a man from Malis, Ephialtes, the son of Eurydemus, came in hoping rich reward from Persians, to tell the king about a track which led over the hills to Thermopylae, and thus he was to prove the death of the Greeks who held the past. So what happened, guys? That one of these Greek guys in this comic movie, they made him disabled because Spartans believe that not everybody can be great warrior. And when the baby was born, it was disabled somehow with some malfunction. So it was taken by a priest to the cliff and thrown down. So they were killing. They were weak. For them, Spartans became heroes even for Hitler, for these for many of these people. On the other hand, in the comic book, they made it that they didn't want to let Ephialtes to join his army when he was disabled. So he was angry about it, and went to Xerxes and told him about a secret path in the mountains. In the mountains, behind the lines, the Persians could attack them from behind and thus crush them. So that's the result of the Battle of Thermopylae. But still, they slowed them down for 3 or 5 days together, so Persian army really came late. And when Athenians had time to move their people from Athens, about some here, to their port called Piraeus, that because Athens didn't have access to the sea at the time, and they built 12 kilometers long wall, like a road protected by walls, to another city at the coast that is called Piraeus. You may know football club Olympiacos Piraeus. It's Athenian today. And from here they transported them to this big island of Salamis, and they actually evacuated. So when Persian army entered Athens, they were empty. It was empty town, thanks to Thermopylae Spartan heroes who died for them. And now Persian army had to fight them, but Persians didn't have navy, and all navy they had, all the ships they had were also Greek ships from these Asian minor Greek city-states. So that's why there was Xerxes, but he was watching this battle only from a hill. How actually the commander of this navy was some Greek uh, female women strategist. I think she was played by Eva Green in the second part of this movie, but I didn't watch it, haven't watched it yet. But I had to watch, as you can see, how Athenian trirema, three-rowed paddles, battleships were able to crush Persian navy and this Greek allied Persian navy and actually defeat. So at the Battle of Salamis, Persians suffered second defeat. The strategos of Athens was called Themistocles, so that's why after Leonidas and Miltiades is the third strategist, third hero of Greek city-states. What followed Xerxes, now when his navy was destroyed, he was winning in the continent, in the lands, but he couldn't go to the mountains without any supplies. When they don't have navy and food from Asia, he had to come back home. Of course, full of anger, he decided to come back next year, but his armies were much smaller already, about like 80,000 men. And by that time, Athenian and Spartan victories, or not victory, but great heroic death, made Greeks and other Greek city-states feel that they should really stand against Persians and they can win. And that's why the next year in 479, when Persians invaded Greece again, so now at the plateau of Platai, že planina, podľa toho sa nazval planina plato, ale toto je Platai, Platai, bitka pri Platajach. Here Greeks, not Persians, not Spartans, all together with Corinthians, Mycenaeans and so on, with about 50,000 armed men, they were able to crush Persian army. So in the way that Persians never ever decided to attack Greek city-states again together. So that was final Persian defeat. So you see that Greek Persian wars lasted only for 11 years together. So that is the part about Greek Persian wars. I'm going to check my time, so about like 16 minutes to go. Now, of course, with all this victory of Platai and what followed was that the biggest city states, the most important city states. So now I change my position, proved to be really like cool and great and start to develop their power and evolve. And from city states, they became really big and rich towns. And among them, there were two dominant, which were Athens and Sparta. Let's talk about Athens first, because after this war ended and 20 years later, they experienced the greatest time of their history that we talk about golden age of Athens, especially when strategos of Athens, main leader of Athenian democracy, became Pericles. You already seen this picture as he was talking to other people, was charismatic speaker with excellent speaking abilities. But what was the point? He was elected 5 or 7 times, and many people start to talk that he's actually becoming a tyrant, and he only using populism. It means giving anything to the people they wanted. So he's actually bringing Athens to bankrupt. On the other hand, so that for that reason, also manipulating with people and he's seizing power for himself. That's why when there were these people voting, this Ostrakos trial, so he was ostracized and banished from Athens twice. But now that during the year they were arguing, so he had so many supporters, so he was actually welcomed back, invited back to come back home to Athens and elected again. What did he do? So he was still excellent statesman, but he used this democracy to seize power for himself and to support his own people. So that's why we talk about populism. So he's celebrating on one hand, but on the other hand, showing another effect of democracy, and that is populism. You could see it in many political parties. If you give you education for free in the past, but today it's trains for free, it is cars for free, and so on. If of course you would elect for me, if I give you ones from history and chocolate bar Snickers and giving 1,000 euros to each. So this is something that we call about populism. It's really dangerous. On the other hand, he wanted to show that his rule is really worthy to do that, and also to keep memory much better than these fights was to build something stable and develop people in a way they could use it in generations followed. So that's why his main idea was to develop culture in forms of architecture and of wisdom, general knowledge for everybody. So during his rule, that was the greatest time for philosophy and development of many sciences that we know today. The other thing is that he finished and he proposed and finished the building of many sites around, especially with rebuilding of main hill fort, rampart of Athens that is called Acropolis. Akropola dodnes aj archeológi sa nazýva vlastne nejaké návršie, ktoré je v podstate centrálnou časťou mesta alebo Radiska, kde by mali byť chrámy, obetiska a možno nejaké správne budovy, kniežacie budovy. This is called Acropolis according to Athenian Acropolis, with central part which is main temple of goddess Athena called Parthenon. So let's have a look of this. This project was given to very famous sculptor that you should know. His name was Phidias, but again, Romans call him Phidias, and English does call Phidias. He projected excellent, like not only rampart with fortification, but the great temple, but even a lot of like treasuries and other temples. But also he provided like other things like places for assemblies called menorah, and also great theater for dramas and comedies that were played in this period in this spot. So this is really great thing for them. Acropolis, as it was built probably in this period, looked like this, but this huge statue of Pallas Athena, goddess of wisdom, and also Agora down that is square of Athens and with disputes. And this is how it looks today, but you will see also pictures how they reconstructed. So imagine that this building is standing here for 2,500 years, still standing. Of course, it was being destroyed very often during conflicts and wars, and there are still plans how to restore it and so on. What is typical for Athens is also this high steep hill with a watchout tower in the past, now shrine. Parthenon was the central part, as you can see, is really big, really huge, so it belonged among the seven wonders of ancient world. And inside this is like 3D render reconstruction was another Phaedia statue. That was statue of Pallas Athena with goddess Nike in here with a shield and so on. All the pillars in here were typical for this Dorian style, but I tell you, and they were decorated. And as like 10 or 20 years later, archaeologists realized again, because 100 years ago it was well known that all these statues and reliefs in here were being colored. So it was not white, only white marble, but it was beautifully decorated, like you can see it. You can see it in here. Okay, what else? So many statues around, it's in gold. So excellent sculptures around were present, and it was really interesting to watch it. So when we generally talk about this, that was the beginning of this Pericles Athens. What followed was that first philosopher Socrates, giving his ideas. He had never written anything, and all his ideas are well known because his disciple, his student, Plato, wrote a lot about him, and he actually wrote like imaginary dialogues between Socrates and Plato, in which he just like reconstructed the philosophy of Socrates. That is like to live for these days, to be modest and so on. Very good, like life philosophy. He will study with Mr. Halan and Mrs. Statečná, uh, later on. But these two guys established something that we call Greek philosophy, which is love for wisdom. But understanding wisdom, anything, it means only to understand many other sciences, from history to languages to geography, coming to basic ideas what is in bios, in life biology, then what is in geos, what is geography, about world, talk about mathematics, which is actually basic counters, and physics, physica. That means like about like understanding the nature around. So that's why even Plato's student or disciple Aristotle. So you see, we're going through decades, a lifetime of three great men, three philosophers, from Pericles times of Socrates, then to Plato, another like 30 years to Aristotle. Aristotle was an old man, and excellent, the best philosopher of history ever. So he was invited and hired of Philip II of Macedonia, king of Macedonia, to be the teacher of his obviously genius son, young Alexander. And Alexander the Great, as a prince and later king of Macedonia, could not have better teacher than Aristotle himself. So for that reason, Alexander would be the greatest conqueror of ancient times, because he didn't want to conquer, and his way of conquest was conquest for culture mostly, and all the time all his decisions were also with keeping with excellent clever thinking and organizing the state in the way how philosopher would do that. So for that reason, whole bunch of philosophers and excellent guys, but in the middle there are two. That's Aristotle and Plato together. This is actually painting by Rafael Santi, an Italian Renaissance painter, who actually gave tribute, just dal poctu, paid tribute to these two philosophers and all these classical philosophers for them. Still, what Greeks didn't know, couldn't do, was this vault, round vault, čiže oblúková architectura, which is typical for Romans, but you will find among the guys Romans, Thomas of Aquino from Middle Ages, even there will be Molière, that was the playwright from Baroque period of France. But this was another thing, Renaissance. When we talk about this, we should mention, of course, historians. And I told about Herodotus. He was not the only one. I told about Thucydides. But there was another guy about Xenophon, who wrote about Persian wars later on, and even Peloponnesian wars. So there were many, many historians like these, and we know plenty of them. So not to mention. Still, when you understand this, you start to write poems, playwrights. You want to give it as movies, maybe as songs, and so on. That's why many famous poets and playwrights appeared in here. These three guys are famous from the Slovak language and literature lessons, which is Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. You know, they wrote many of the plays in these other things. But we have also visual arts, and these are sculptures. I told you about Phidias, who was not only great architect but also a great sculptor. This Pallas Athena, you will see also the picture, probably reconstructed hypothetical statue of god Zeus from Olympia, that was one of seven wonders, made of ivory, like 5 meters a big statue of main god made of ivory, chit, slonovina, and gold. And Myron or Miron, that's, yeah, my name is according to this guy, and he became, this name was really like popular in classical Greece, and later on in Byzantine Empire. From Byzantine Empire it moved to Eastern Orthodox countries with Eastern Orthodox Christianity, which is Ukraine, Russia. And because my father, my whole family is from Eastern Slovakia, from these Eastern Orthodox and Greek Catholic lands, so name Miron is pretty common in Ukraine and in Eastern Slovakia, so that's my name from Greece. But he was excellent sculpture, this guy, not me, of course. And you will see another statue that is probably symbol of ancient Greece, and I will explain you why. If I try to guess you that what these guys, Archimedes, Euclides, Thales, Pythagoras, Hippocrates, you see medicine, geometry, mathematics, medicine, many things that these philosophers knew and started to write was just only because after the Dark Age, during the archaic period, they start to read again, write again, memorize again. Thanks to history, as Herodotus, they realized that it's good to write it down and to give it to the others in academia, that were school in Athens for Athenian young people. And in this way, they start to write it. And each of these guys was actually summoning for the first time, analyzing what is biology, what is geometry, what is mathematics, giving the basic definitions from Athens. Democritus, he was the first one who gave this word atom, like the basic particle. So this is the thing that Greeks actually gave to begin for, because the philosophy that is loving wisdom. I believe you can see it. If not, I will read it for you. From loving wisdom to all sciences, which is in here, and from all the sciences you can see the result in arts, which is in architecture, in sculptures, then in stories, which is drama, and either tragedies or comedies. And together, all of these, that, for example, Pericles paid entrance fee to theaters for all the people. So imagine that only to develop your knowledge and wisdom, politicians will pay you like free tickets to theaters. And you know what? You have it. To savlate kulturne poukazy, čo máte. So it is something that you actually have to go there. And later on, if people didn't attend it, they has to pay taxes, high taxes. So only thanks to visiting drama, comedies, and tragedies, to understand the world, to know more, and not to be stupid voters, to be this sheep, but to understand where is danger of tyranny, where is what is worthy to sacrifice to do so your economy and your family can live, and can survive. So this was really cool and really nice, and how they try to develop it. On the end, some people may call it populism, some other like that it was the greatest thing, the greatest part. So what does it mean to have these classical Greek ideals where actually depicted also in the statues that you have in here? Yeah, you see even like genitals, but this is history. It's not the lesson of religious education. So in this way, what were these sculptures? The sculptures actually showing either gods, goddesses, Aphrodite, the goddess of love. That could be maybe God, the messenger God, or Apollon, maybe. But they look like humans. They were not monsters like from Mesopotamia or from Egypt, like half human, half animal. So in this way, they try to depict in a couple of things that only yesterday I put together because I'm preparing Renaissance lesson for the others. So what were they like? All these statues. They were very realistic. Imagine if you want to draw a man, like you remember when I gave you a task to draw guys, I said it was really bad for me. Why? Because probably you don't know, you don't have skill in biology, in anatomy, and thus you don't know where and what muscles, what is the proportions and ratio. So the guys, sculptors, had to study human body so precisely from inside, from anatomical side, that and even mathematical side, that they were excellent, so realistic. So they, thanks to this, they're very accurate. Their proportions were very good. Usually when I draw something, there is very big head and very big hands. And it's not good because I just don't know the ratio of it. I don't know the anatomy, don't know the mathematics of it. They are very natural. It means that they are not standing and not still like, these Egyptian statues or Sumerian, Persian statues, but they were in move. Like you saw this picture of a dying Greek warrior. Emotions, dying, moving. Apollon here is doing some sign. Aphrodite is like when you have to stand for a long time, you'll not be standing like a soldier, like guardian at Buckingham Palace, but you'll be like revealed. your spine to reveal. This is called contrapposto. It's Latin or Italian name for že protistoj, that you move your weight on one leg. Že ste tak vytrčení, hej? And this is contrapposto. It's very natural, biological. The statues are moving. It's very difficult to make statue that is moving, doing something like this. They're very emotive. The war soldier there is dying. Apollon is probably afraid of something. Aphrodite is looking at some guy, maybe. They're very humane. Even Goddess looks like any other lady. She's not thin like in Gothic period, not too fat like in prehistoric period. She's just accurate, for that. Very individual. There are only couple of statues later coming in Hellenistic period with a lot of people, more people. Only one guy is important. One woman, one man. There is God. This human is so important. He is just individual, so human, but he's almost divine. Gods look like humans, and this is very important thing because in the history you'll see that very often after the times of oppression, of slavery, of nobility and peasants, farmers, subjects, of tyrannies, people would come back to these ideals of uh, that would be great enough to copy them, to repeat them, and people thus will come by that. They will be repeated by Orient, by Persians, by Romans. Most of the statues of Greek statues are copies of Romans. Renaissance period would be Renaissance, rebirth, znovuzrodenie, čo? Antiky, klasického Grécka. Those ideals of Baroque with their sciences, classicism of the French Revolution, American Revolution, and also sorry for that, by us too. So for the next lesson, guys, because we are over, I just continue with art of classical Greece, and we'll move to Hellenistic Greece. So this is the end for today. Don't forget, nezabudnite odpovedať na otázky, no a ja idem hneď nahrávať ďalšiu hodinu, ktorú tento týždeň budete mať a s ňou myslím, že už bez problémov dokončíme staroveké Grécko. Dobre, decká, to je z mojej strany všetko, takže majte sa pekný deň a vidíme sa na ďalšej hodine, či dejepisu, či OMK, už pod rôznymi názvami. Bye bye.